Welcome to this explainer. When we think about massive business success stories, our minds almost automatically go to that classic myth of the lone genius. You know the image, right? A brilliant visionary working tirelessly in a dimly lit garage, just single-handedly changing the world through sheer willpower. But the reality? Well, it's actually vastly different. That lone genius relies entirely on an intricate, often completely invisible, ecosystem to survive and thrive. Think about it like a giant garden. Just like a seed absolutely cannot grow into a towering tree without the right soil, sunlight, and water, an entrepreneur literally cannot build a successful enterprise without a supportive environment. So today, we're diving into this whole fascinating concept, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. To really wrap our heads around this, let's start with a question. Why do certain cities, places like Bengaluru or Hyderabad, produce significantly more successful startups than others? I mean, if entrepreneurship was just about individual brilliance, successful companies would be evenly distributed everywhere, right? But they aren't. They cluster in very specific zip codes. Why is that? It's because a startup success is heavily dictated by its surrounding environment, not just the founder's isolated brilliance. The local climate, both economically and socially, matters just as much as the actual business idea. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for unpacking this whole ecosystem concept. We'll start with number 1, the entrepreneurial spark. Then 2, understanding the ecosystem. 3, the enabling factors. 4, early stage challenges. And finally, 5, building conducive environments. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, the entrepreneurial spark. Now, the classic definition out there often simply describes an entrepreneur as a business founder or maybe a small business owner. But honestly, that definition is way too narrow. Not every business owner is necessarily an entrepreneur in the truest sense of the word. Real entrepreneurs are the dynamic force at the absolute center of the enterprise. They're visionaries, innovators, and leaders. They don't just sit back and maintain the status quo. They actively seek out problems to solve and create value where, well, none existed before. So what exactly makes up this spark? It's actually a really specific set of intrinsic psychological traits. An entrepreneur is visionary and agile. They're fiercely passionate about their work, and yeah, they are totally willing to take calculated risks. But perhaps the most important thing, they possess incredible perseverance and resilience. They have this unique ability to just sense their environment and convert adversity into an opportunity by providing a solution to it. If you think about your own ventures, these internal traits are exactly what allow an entrepreneur to mobilize resources and capture value when things get really tough. Now, what's really interesting here is how researchers like Histrich and his colleagues map out the temporal journey of an entrepreneur. It follows 4 distinct stages. It starts with stage 1, identifying and evaluating the opportunity. Then, stage 2, developing the business plan. Next is stage 3, determining the resources required. And finally, stage 4, actually managing the resulting enterprise. It's absolutely vital to understand this timeline before we even look at the spatial environment, because the ecosystem affects the entrepreneur differently at every single one of these stages. Moving right along to section 2, understanding the ecosystem. At its core, an entrepreneurship ecosystem is the social and economic environment that affects entrepreneurship. It's an interaction amongst a set of independent actors and factors that lead to, encourage, nurture, and promote entrepreneurship. This is what we call the systems perspective. The ecosystem is built on a highly dynamic interaction of social, political, economic, and cultural elements. All the stakeholders, whether we're talking about government bodies, private investors, educational institutions, or mentors, they are all deeply interconnected. They might have different individual goals, sure, but together they either facilitate or totally limit the development of entrepreneurs in that specific region. We can see that structural interconnectedness perfectly mapped out right here when policymakers need to step in and fix structural deficiencies. They can't just look at one piece. They have to look at the entire board. Mature ecosystems foster significantly more growth because these facilitating factors work in tandem. They definitely don't operate in silos. A strong university network feeds into local venture capital, which is then supported by friendly local government policies. When all these elements align, they cultivate the absolute right ambiance to encourage the most crucial element of all, innovation. Which brings us to section 3, the enabling factors. According to a major report by the World Economic Forum, while global ecosystems naturally differ from one part of the world to another, there are universal similarities facing early-stage companies everywhere. They found that these 3 fundamental areas matter the absolute most: access to markets, human capital or workforce, and finance. Think about it. Without a market to actually sell to, skilled people to build the product, and the money to keep the lights on, the seeds simply cannot germinate, literally no matter how brilliant the founder's initial idea is. And this brilliantly illustrates how abstract concepts directly affect daily business operations. Using Daniel Eisenberg's ecosystem domains, let's look at policy. Things like regulations, tax incentives, and the overall ease of doing business can either aggressively attract new ventures or create massive barriers. Then there's culture. This provides the societal soul. If a region has zero tolerance for failure and doesn't celebrate its role models, no one's going to take the risk of starting a business. And finally, infrastructure. We aren't just talking about roads and transport here. It's high-speed internet and access to specialized professional services like legal and financial help that physically and digitally connect the whole network together. So, the crucial takeaway here is that when all these enabling factors are actually functioning, they produce innovation. The famous economist Joseph Schumpeter defined innovation as the application of knowledge to produce new knowledge, basically introducing something entirely new to the economy. It could be a new product, a new method of production, or reaching a completely new market. Innovation isn't just some corporate buzzword, it is the default condition for growth. Without the generation of novelty in the marketplace, the ecosystem just stagnates, and eventually it dies. Let's transition to Section 4, Early Stage Challenges. The sources classify early-stage challenges into two distinct categories: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic challenges are those internal limitations rooted in the founder's immediate circle. We're talking about things like limited personal capability, lack of family backing, illiteracy, or specific societal biases against their community. Extrinsic challenges, on the flip side, are the external organizational and regulatory hurdles of the macro environment. This includes a major lack of regional finance, severely limited market access, or systemic, deep-rooted issues like bribery, corruption, and negative sociocultural attitudes. To give you a super specific example of an extrinsic hurdle, let's look at intellectual property rights, your patents and copyrights. Even if an entrepreneur has a truly groundbreaking, innovative idea, systemic inefficiencies can derail them completely. If the regional judicial process is weak or just incredibly slow, legally protecting that new technology becomes almost impossible. And without that legal protection, the entrepreneur can't safely bring their innovation to market, and the entire entrepreneurial process just grinds to a total halt. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Building Conducive Environments. Building a truly conducive environment requires highly coordinated action. Policymakers must act deliberately to improve the overall ease of doing business. Step 1, implementing single-window operations and approvals, so founders aren't paralyzed by a mountain of bureaucratic red tape before they even sell their very first product. Step 2 means formulating favorable government policies and tax incentives to actively attract capital. And Step 3 is all about developing robust clusters of ancillary industries and MSMEs. That's micro, small, and medium enterprises. So startups actually have local suppliers and partners to rely on. The whole shebang is about intentionally aligning government support with the exact needs of those early-stage companies. Which leaves us with this final thought. As you've seen, the lone genius is pretty much a myth. Real success is deeply tied to a complex, interconnected web of culture, policy, infrastructure, and human capital. It genuinely takes an entire ecosystem to grow a single successful enterprise. So, knowing how interconnected the system is, what specific role do you play in cultivating your own local entrepreneurial ecosystem? Whether you are a consumer, a mentor, an investor, or maybe an aspiring founder yourself, you are a crucial part of the soil. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the systems that shape our world.